Welcome back to Equal Time Soccer. We are here with Katie Aafedt, who is on the ground in Chapel Hill at Dorrance Field. Katie, you are about to see a uniquely Minnesota matchup. The Gophers are in town to face off against UNC. Of course, anyone who has been following our coverage this fall knows that UNC is in part powered by two big-time Minnesotans, Claire Gagne in goal, and of course, Maddie Deline up in the attack. What's the vibe like there right now, Katie?
Well, it's beautiful. Teams haven't taken the field yet, but it's probably low 60s and sunny. It's going to be a gorgeous day here. How are you not excited? At least I am for this
Yeah.
matchup.
Well, and both these teams got here in fairly dramatic fashion. So the Gophers are playing South Carolina. They go down in halftime. They're down 1-0. Familiar territory for them. They're a very
Yep.
second half team.
Yep.
Bo and Rowe both get on the board. So Sophia Bowman, of course, a close to your heart as a former Edina Hornet. And
Yes.
then Sophia Romine, a big time, equal time favorite. And what I mentioned in the scout, looking at the tape on South Carolina, when their keeper got beat, a lot of the time it was from distance. Romine
Yep.
did that exact thing, took it from distance, and got them the win. UNC has just like continued their dramatic results this fall. So there's a penalty early in the first half, or like 37th minute, whenever. Claire Gagne, huge save, like keeps them in the game, and then they score. We talk about the Gophers being a second half team. UNC is a borderline like last second team.
Yeah.
They sc-
17 seconds to be exact.
they score a huge chunk of their goals are in like that last 15 minutes, even the last several minutes. They find a goal late, of course. Totally stacked team, so even when they're not scoring and the game is scoreless, not surprising that talent can win out on something like that. But I'm curious, because these are two second half teams with very different rotations. UNC historically has been known as sort of a heavy shift, like get runners in, get runners out, run the press. And maybe it's been a little different this year. Maddie's been playing some pretty heavy minutes as a
Hmm.
as a frontline player, but they typically have rotated much more than a team like the Gophers. The Gophers, I think, they have the leanest rotation in the Big Ten. I have to imagine one of the leanest rotations in the whole country.
Hmm.
And this is a short rest. Typically, college games are Thursday, Sunday. This was Friday, Sunday. How much do you think something like that could impact these squads? Obviously, everyone's fit. Obviously, everyone is like a top shelf athlete. But just, do you see that as something that might impact the game?
Oh, definitely. And then I think for the Gophers, you add nerves in there too.
Hmm.
When was the last time they've been this far? They're
Yeah.
at a historic field. There is kind of the lore of North Carolina soccer. So that there's all of that kind of looming over their
Right.
heads. Plus, they've been away from their beds for, however long they've been
Yeah.
in Carolina. Plus, they're so fast all over the field. So
Yep.
with the Gophers not, having a heavy rotation,
Yep.
Gopher legs are going to have to stay as fresh as humanly possible. So,
Yep.
but they showed it against South Carolina, so I have no doubts they can do it. We'll see what the
Yeah.
game looks like.
Well, and you saw the speed. Speed was part of what beat them on the edge when to how South Carolina got on the board. You saw just it was sort of a run down the side that you see all the time, but it's
Hmm.
one of those where it's like the run just kept going, kept
Yep.
going, kept going, and the
Yep.
runner eventually, you know, Zbielich isn't able to track. Overberg can't get all the way over. Childers can't get all the way over because it's just at a certain point you sort of think you're going to catch up, and then all of a sudden, like a player like with the speed of a Maddie Deline, that's the exact type of thing that you saw in that South Carolina play, where it's just like, well, even if your positioning is pretty close,
Right.
one of those mistakes in a game like this is so tight. And so yeah, it'll be interesting to see. It'll also be interesting to see because Carolina, like I mentioned, also is way more prolific in the second half
Yep.
offensively. So if either of these teams score in the first half, I think that's going to be kind of news. Like
Yeah.
I think that's actually going to be like both these teams really,
Against the grain.
yeah. And so
Yep.
it'll be interesting to see how that happens. And I'm curious too, today we're actually loaded with Minnesotans in sort of what I would consider pretty deep run. If you're in the Sweet 16, you
Yeah.
are a very
That's
good soccer
legit.
team.
Yep.
And like, because I mentioned once in a while, when you see a team like, the Gophers in the opening round play a team like South Dakota State is a long time winning program. I mean, like
Hmm.
it's like 8 straight years of winning 12 games or more, whatever,
Yeah.
so even to make the tournament, you are a solid squad. Then to win once, yeah, you can get lucky once. But if you win
Right.
2 games and you're in the third round, you are a very, very
Yep.
strong team. And
Yep.
And you and I are nothing if not Minnesota hype people. And just we have to absolutely shout out all of these Minnesotans playing deep in the NCAA tournament. I think it's unique this year. I'll do a deeper
Yes.
scrub to try and do it. But so the game just ended where Peyton Cahill is a keeper for Wake. She I don't think has been playing in the late part of the year, but played early. They beat Ohio State, so that's
Oh,
one.
yay.
That's
Okay.
that's one Minnesotan
Yep.
and one Minnesotan squad. There's 7 teams with Minnesotans in the Sweet 16, 25-ish players. I'm just doing rough mental math. So Minnesota, obviously, dozen plus players playing UNC, where Claire Gagne and Maddie Deline, they'll play at 4. The winner of that game will go on to play the winner of Vanderbilt versus Penn State, where Caitlin
Hmm.
McBean plays. And McBean scored in the last round, by the way.
She's killing it.
Mississippi State plays at 5. They play, and these are all Central Time. They play Notre Dame, obviously another Edina favorite, another Katie Aafedt favorite. Izzy Engel, I think, both scored a goal and earned a PK. So like multiple goal contributions. She has been ridiculous in her freshman year. Then USC gets a rematch with Wisconsin, where they played in LA in the regular season. 5 Minnesotans on that Gopher squad, some big time contributors for them. Isag, Adringa, Poor, Jacobson, Gilliland.
Mm-hmm.
And then last but not least, Virginia Tech takes on Iowa, where 2 Minnesotans, sort of the opposite ends of the age spectrum, a 5th-year grad student in Maya Hansen and then a young freshman Barrett Parton, are powering their attack. So 7 different teams in the Sweet 16 with Minnesotans. And like I said, I haven't done a full scrub of this, but it feels like that is a peak high water mark for Minnesota representation in the Sweet 16.
Yeah, I don't remember it ever being. I mean, I remember years where they had out of the first round, you'd get maybe 2 or 3, but it's makes it such a fun tournament to watch because you have a team to root for in every game.
Yeah. And for some comparison, I did check at least last year. So like last year, for example, Penn State and UNC both make deep runs, even beyond the Sweet 16. Wisconsin was in the second round, so they got a win. Mm-hmm. And then after that, no one else passed the second round. So it's you truly, even that going from like 2.5 to 7 is like, that's crazy stuff.
Yep.
And so I do think one anecdote I want to mention, and I won't mention which coach. The Big Ten tournament was in Minnesota this fall. I called all 6 of those games. My throat almost exploded. I was so worn out. But I talked to one coach, a visiting coach at the Big Ten tournament, and it was like music to my and your ears, Katie. Like the coach said, "Wow, yeah, maybe we should recruit in Minnesota more." And I had to like keep my cool. I was like,
"Bite the inside of your cheek."
Yeah, for sure. I was just like not being, yes, you should come, whatever. But I mean, you see these players. We've had you on before. You help you help players go through the recruiting process. You did that. As a very influential high school coach, you help players at MTA. You help former high school players, whatever. So you see this recruiting landscape. Do you think, does a showing like this in the Sweet 16, does that help add visibility? Like, do coaches then say like, oh yeah, I guess there were a bunch of kids from Minnesota. Maybe the Twin Cities is kind of a market. Maybe Minnesota is a market. Like, do coaches think that way, or am I just like imagining?
Absolutely. That? No, they definitely do. And when you, do a deep dive into these teams, the Minnesotan players are not just playing, they're contributing. I mean, I would love when you do your dive to see, average minutes for all these guys too, because they're playing a ton. You've got leading scorers on a lot of these teams too. So they are definitely, they're a huge reason why Minnesota just continues to be higher and higher on the recruiting map.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's a big point of what you just said, which is it's one thing to go to a big time program. We've had players like this at big time programs, but maybe aren't in like the core rotation. This fall is so incredibly the opposite of that. Izzy Engel, immediately a gigantic piece of the Notre Dame attack. Yep. Maddie Deline's season stats are never going to jump out because she missed a third of the season at the U20 World Cup. But then like Gagne immediately, she's been a star forever, but like McBean keeping her run, the Wisconsin players
Barrett Parton, is killing it at Iowa
as a freshman. And then, Maya Hansen to be productive, even coming off the ACL and jumping up to Power 4 is like really impressive as well. So can't say enough about the Minnesota scene. Obviously a lot of coaches nationally are watching the show, Katie. Of course they are. So
of course they
always do. And so if you're watching, come recruit in Minnesota, baby.
Exactly. Come find me.
Because guess what? We'll also amplify your program for you. Get
Totally.
like go get your clicks, baby. Get your
Hand
views.
in hand. Yes.
Well, the other thing, so kickoff for the Gophers UNC is in about 45 minutes. We said Vanderbilt Penn State is just after that, then Notre Dame, then Wisconsin, then Iowa. But before the games kick off too, one thing while we have you, just because you are such an expert on the recruiting side, obviously sort of the signing day, exciting for so many of these players. Obviously, not every signing, like there's a lot of, late signings that could happen, but sort of the big splashy day just occurred a few days back. Anything from you about either this year's Minnesota class or anything about there's sort of a new landscape we hint around it in shows here where the rules aren't finalized, but sort of new guidelines are being put in place where there'll be quote unquote roster limits.
Mm-hmm.
I think that discussion at times gets a little overblown, but essentially roster limits will be about 28 players. And then the player compensation stuff is messier because I think conferences are still sorting it out. But the main thing that's occurred that gets a lot of play is that in D1, you're going to be capped at 28 player rosters,
Mm-hmm.
which if you follow the teams we cover, it's not that frequent that teams are above that. It's part of why
Right.
I haven't gone nuts talking about it much, but you do actually see some gigantic rosters for teams that like to have a big training squad, like to have whatever. So, for example, even some Minnesota connected programs like Wright State, where Crystal
Mm-hmm.
Seidel is an assistant, Ole Miss, where Molly Rouse is the head coach,
Molly.
some of those rosters actually are in the high 30s. So there
Mm-hmm.
will be some drama, but or at least, there will be an adjustment, excuse me. But for you, is there anything either about those changes or about this year's Minnesota class that's sort of worth shouting out?
Well, Minnesota and Aaron, they sit in a great spot. Their roster is in a very manageable spot.
Yeah.
Their class of 25, I mean, they got two of the best out of Minnesota in Tenley Senden and Sawyer
Yep.
Danielson.
Yep.
Tenley was a pain in my side for many, many years in the Wayzata Edina matchups. She's so fast.
Yeah.
And, much like Tony was glad to see Izzy go, I'm pretty sure the entire Edina
Yeah.
side is glad to see Tenley go.
That's
She's
great.
a huge pickup. Sawyer is another one. She rehabbed an ACL, so she missed her high school season, but her left foot is drool worthy.
Yeah.
So they, and with the Gophers showing in this NCAA tournament, they're only going to get bigger and better recruits. It's going to be easier to draw to their program. So, I mean, I think this is a huge platform for them to continue to be able to recruit some big guns.
Yeah. And even just in terms of the class out of the state in general, we always have been an exporter. Part of why Mark does that big roundup of all the D1 players, all the players we just have been mentioning the whole show at these other programs. In terms of like what Minnesota produced in general, who are some sort of stars that maybe next fall we'll be talking about, or even just like even if they don't play as freshmen, who are some sort of jump out players or fun players that you have followed, even if you didn't coach them, that are coming out of the state that might start college next fall?
Well, Tenley is one of them, but other than that, you've got Madigan Vixabong at Pulling Angels.
Yep.
She's another one where she kind of has come into her own. She's going to be at Nebraska next year.
Yep.
She's a holding center mid, but she can play offensively. She's just one of those rock solid, never makes a mistake type kids that I think, when the confidence and the swagger came with it, look out. I bet she contributes quickly to Nebraska.
Yep.
I got to give a shout out to Ashley Turk. I know that she's a current freshman, but come on now. She went from a midfielder to an outside back and is absolutely killing it. And for a fun wrinkle tonight, I believe is tasked with the job of marking Maddie. So it's going to be interesting because those two played together all the way up and they played 2 years at Edina together. So it'll be fun.
That is, well, yeah, we always happy to shout out Turk. We'll get her on a show eventually. I think the team was kind of protecting freshmen and not having freshmen do media. But man, what a cap, or what a way to build your fall of already playing every single game, starter at outside back, and now you get to go up against Maddie Deline. It's
one of your good friends. They practiced together 200 times over the last however many years. This is gonna be good.
I mean, give me a break. You're going up against a star youth national team player and undoubtedly a future pro. And the toolsiness, that battle is going to be really fun to watch. We'll be watching it down at Blackheart. I mean, because like Ashley Turk has looked so good at outside
Hmm.
back, has the size, has the physicality, you know,
The fitness.
has the mind, has the fitness. But a player like Maddie Deline is such a specific challenge just
Hmm.
because of the paciness. You know, she's so good. This year, it's really funny because all of her stats, it's like a lot of goal creation, like by dropping those assists, like way more assists than goals. But it's because you have to account for her
Hmm.
that you have to shut down her offensive side. So then
Hmm.
she always has this opportunity of like, okay, well, if you're going to shut down my angle, like I can find this pass, you know, like
Right.
I can find you. So yeah, what a test. Oh my gosh, just
Yeah.
absolutely nuts. Well,
Yep.
and just in general, do you hear about, do the rule changes, do those come up more in conversation? Does it flavor any of these conversations with recruits and coaches?
Yes, definitely. Because, one of the things we do is I make the recruits go look at the rosters. If they're already
Mhm.
sitting in the 40s, probably not smart to continue on that path because they have a lot
Yeah.
of trimming. Once we get to 27s, 28s, maybe, but for
Yep.
25s and 26s, be really careful.
Yeah.
But other than that, it's just kind of watching to see what they do over the next year to see
Yeah.
how they handle getting down to that 28.
Totally. Well, and the other thing that happened recently is the portal. So there's sort of multiple times where the portal, quote unquote, opens. And so players were able to hop in. I think it was like the 18th or whatever. A few days ago, they were able to go in. And one thing I've noticed is you still don't see every player publicly post about going in the portal. Actually, even when the portal rules got easier, it still was this very like
Hmm.
hush hush of like,
Taboo.
I would learn about a player in the portal and they'd be like, please don't talk about it, whatever. Like it was very nervous, very, very nervous about, which is really funny because every single coach sees every single player in it.
Right.
And so it's everything but public. Like everyone in the world except like non-coaches like knows who's in the portal. But
Hmm.
the thing that happened this year is players were more public. So it's still a minority of players that publicly post about it, but it's way more than it used to be.
Oh, all
Way
over
more.
social media.
And so, you know, if folks probably saw us amplify. So if players want to post it, we will amplify because I'm
Hmm.
assuming they want the visibility. So, for
Right.
example, a Minnesotan publicly posted Emma Knack, the keeper who split time
Hmm.
at South Dakota State, you know, is a big athletic keeper, can make some really acrobatic saves, has played early. So she's in the portal and she's one example. I don't know if I've seen other Minnesotans publicly post.
Hmm.
Um, but that difference, does that feel sort of different to you too? Like if a
Hmm.
player is thinking about going in the portal and they ask your opinion on it, what's your sort of vibe on it? Because obviously, I think the tension is college coaches, there's always this thing where like players are supposed to be humble and like
Hmm.
have humility and not be showy, but
Hmm.
also, you know, players on the flip side want visibility because they want more programs
Yep.
looking at them. So if a player asks you about like, should I post or should I just go in and like email coaches, how do you talk them through that?
I mean, I tend to tip to the side of not posting, but that's just always
Mm-hmm.
how I roll, to the
Mm-hmm.
humble side. And
Mm-hmm.
they can be seen, the coaches aren't necessarily trolling social media.
Right.
So, I'm more of the side of email the coaches. Let's use the connections instead of social media.
Yeah.
Because the other thing is if you're going to post, you need to be ready for what comes after. Your
Yeah.
team finds out if they don't know. Your coach might not be super, former coach might be super pleased about it.
Yep.
But yeah, so there's a lot that goes to it.
Right. Well, and I think, you know, all credit to these accounts that do some of the roundups and the re-amplifying and stuff, and they sort of encourage players to post because of the visibility. I will just say, just grain of salt, like I've
It's really totally fine. Sorry. Carolina fans.
Katie's too popular, you guys. This is
Yeah.
the challenge. The funny thing about the posting thing is I think people forget how kooky coaches can be about like, is that a yellow flag for me? Is that a red flag for me? And so
Mhm.
the 2 cents I would give is in support of what you said, Katie, which is I think people probably sometimes underestimate how particular coaches might be about what it means for you to post publicly about it.
Right.
And so even if it feels like you're getting visibility, and granted, for some people it might work better because if you're at like a really small program but you want visibility, you know,
Mhm.
but just it is funny because I've talked to so many college coaches that like they all are very specific in the way
Yep.
they process whatever. And so
Yep.
yeah, it is interesting.
You don't want to piss the wrong person off doing it. That's how I look at it.
Exactly. Well, Katie, Gophers at UNC kicking off in
Yes.
just a half hour or so. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes. Thank you for having me.